in January, what we're really doing is just finishing up the last of our bulb planting. Now, lots of people are thinking bulb planting, oh, well, the bulbs are in the shops, in August, September, and a lot of bulbs, of course, are ideally planted in the autumn. But there's lots of bulbs, actually, that are best planted in the green, so as soon as they finish flowering in the spring, great time to move bulbs that perhaps you already have. But also, really, for us, we have 35,000 bulbs or 36,000 bulbs that have been planted into the garden this autumn. So we've literally been bulb planting and clearing for months on end, and it can get a little monotonous, but that is what builds the great displays. It is the fact that we can mass plant like that, and a lot of repetition and a lot of very similar things. I mean, saying that there's a lot of repetition and a lot of the same sort of bulbs, daffodils and tulips, of course, are the classic ones. And daffodils, we try to make sure they go in first. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of some great bulbs. I mean, tulips, these guys flower a bit later, so we can keep these back a little bit so they can get planted October onwards, really. September, October, we like to get the daffodils in first. Some of the later flowers, like the alliums, these guys, we're just planting the last of these now. Now, most bulbs, of course, can be planted, rule of thumb, twice their depth, maybe 3 times their depth. It depends on who you listen to. Personally, I like to go for twice the depth because then we can in some areas we can get them out when we're finished with the display, because we may not want them again for the next season. In other places where we think they're going to be very established, they're going to be there for years and years, like the fritillaries. This is Fritillaria imperialis, the crown imperial. This guy we plant nice and deep, we plant with lots of humus. Fascinating bulbs. They have the most amazing and huge flowers of different forms, different colours, about 80 centimetres tall. Really important with the fritillaries. By the way, you'll always know a fritillary because if you smell it, once you've smelt one and you know that's what it is, it has such a unique smell that you'll never forget it, and you'll always know if you've got a crown imperial in your hand. They have this big hole, and that's where the flower stem is emerging from. Now, most bulbs, of course, you just plant them straight in upwards, but if you do that with the crown imperials, the water sits in the top there and it rots the bulb from the inside out. So the best thing to do with the crown imperials is plant them on their sides, and then the emerging flower shoot will it knows which way is up and down. You can see here that the root's just beginning to form where we've left it, right to the end of its planting, time. Now this is the last opportunity to get these in, and we just let the flower bud emerge from the side, and it'll aim straight for the sky. And now this is another fritillaria. Same again, has this big hole because the flowers are absolutely enormous. They have to hold dozens of small bell-like flowers, which are quite often nearly the size of my thumb, all hanging around a chunky stem. So once again, planted on his side. But look at the size of this bulb. This is Fritillaria persica. And you really won't have seen many of this particular one. This is called the Persian lily. Quite well known if you look in books, and actually has been known in cultivation since the 1500s. But a lot of the fritillarias, are difficult to get them to repeat flower because they like lots of potash. They like a nice deep soil. They don't like to be too wet in the summer. They like to bake and get nice and hot and dry. But in their flowering period in the spring, they like to be nice and moist. So it's actually very difficult to get these guys to establish just where you want. And I guess that's what's put a lot of people off. That's why they haven't tried to plant these too much. Or if they have, they've not had a great deal of success. And they're a relatively expensive bulb. You can imagine that took quite a few years to get to that size. But at least the growers are nice enough that if you're only using it for an annual display, a very extravagant annual display, if you weren't going to actually plant this, they do ensure that there's at least enough energy in that stored bulb to flower its first year. Now, a lot of bulbs, obviously the fritillarias can be a bit temperamental, but most bulbs often flower their hearts out in their first year because they've been G'd up with lots of food by the growers. And in their second year, they can often come up blind. Don't panic, particularly with daffodils, this is very common. They'll often settle down again. Don't cut the foliage down, just let them come up blind, let them grow. Following year, they'll probably settle in very nicely and continue to flower for years and years and years. Obviously with the tulips, depends on which ones you pick. You know, they can flower for 1 or 2 years, maybe 5 or 10 if you're very lucky with some of the Darwin hybrids, and if they like where they are, then they can go for years. But often people treat them like basically an annual bulb. They go into a display for a spring display, and then they're dug out with the display ready for a new summer display. So they're dug out with whatever you've had in with them for a spring display.